There are pine timbers that have been in the ground for over 1,000 years. Not preserved by exceptional conditions, not protected by extraordinary luck of soil chemistry or climate, deliberately treated, before they went into the ground, by craftsmen who understood something about wood and mineral saturation that the modern lumber industry has no commercial interest in teaching you. The softwood that those timbers were made from, the same pine and spruce species that dominate the forests of northern Europe, has a rated outdoor lifespan without treatment of perhaps 5 to 15 years in ground contact. The treated versions lasted through the Viking Age, the medieval period, and the Industrial Revolution, and are still being excavated as structural timber, not as wrought. The distinction between those timbers and the ones rotting in your fence posts is not species, not climate, and not luck. It is a deliberate process of mineral and resinous saturation that the craftsmen who built the Norse world developed through observation, refined through generations of practice, and passed down through a working tradition that modern construction has almost entirely abandoned, not because it stopped working but because it requires time and understanding rather than a trip to a lumber yard. The starting observation was picasta, pitch pine, the wood that forms in a pine tree when it is stressed, wounded, or aged. In those conditions, the tree floods its own heartwood with resin, filling the cellular structure so completely that the result is a material dramatically harder and more rot-resistant than the surrounding wood from the same tree. The resin does not coat the wood from the outside. It occupies the cellular void space from within, and that internal occupation is what makes it inaccessible to the moisture and biological activity that destroys untreated wood. The craftsmen who understood this learned to replicate it deliberately, not by waiting for a tree to stress itself, but by creating the thermal and physical conditions that force resinous compounds into wood's cellular structure. The method was soil burial under controlled heat. Green pine timber, partially buried and exposed to slow fire, slow enough to heat the wood through without burning the surface, hot enough to liquefy and mobilize the resinous compounds in the heartwood and drive them outward into the sapwood layers. The surrounding soil provided two functions simultaneously. It controlled the heat gradient, slowing the temperature rise to the rate that allowed resin movement rather than surface combustion, and it provided physical compression that prevented the wood from expanding freely as it heated. That compression is what forced the mobilized resin into the cellular voids rather than allowing it to evaporate or drip from the surface. Weeks of this treatment produced wood that a modern materials scientist would describe as a natural resin polymer composite, wood fibers providing the structural template, polymerized resin filling and locking the matrix. The penetration is what made it permanent. Treatments that sit on the surface of wood are accessible to weathering, abrasion, and biological degradation. A treatment that occupies the cellular interior of the wood cannot be removed from the outside. It is protected by the outer fiber layers, and those outer fibers can weather and gray and show their age while the internal saturation continues performing its preservation function for decades or centuries beyond what any surface coating could achieve. This is the principle that modern wood hardener chemistry replicates through a different chemical route.
J.B. Weld 8281 Professional size steel reinforced epoxy penetrates porous, degraded, or soft wood fiber and polymerizes in place, filling the same cellular voids, creating the same composite structure, and achieving the same result of a wood material that is harder and more resistant than what you started with.
For restoring old timber, reinforcing soft wood that needs to perform structurally, or replicating the penetrating saturation of the ancient method with modern materials, this is the product that does it correctly. The link is in the description. What the soil burial was providing that the heat alone could not is compression during the setting phase, the physical force that kept the wood cellular matrix closed while the resin polymerized into it rather than polymerizing in an expanded, open configuration. Wood that sets without compression achieves partial saturation. Wood that sets under compression achieves the density that defines the ancient treated timber. The Work Pro bar clamp set replicates this: 6 clamps, one-handed operation, 150-pound load limit, 4 6-inch and 2 12-inch sizes for different timber dimensions. Applied during the curing period of the epoxy hardener, they provide the compression that the soil burial was providing for the original craftsman, the force that closes the fiber matrix around the penetrating material and locks both into the composite structure that lasts. Without pressure during setting, the modern replication produces a good result. With pressure, it produces the correct one. The link is in the description. 1,000 years is not the goal for your fence posts. But understanding what achieved 1,000 years reveals exactly what is missing from the treatments that fail in 10, and the gap between 10 years and a century is not as large as the lumber industry's replacement model would prefer you to believe. Subscribe to In the Beginning. The product links are in the description. See you in the next one.